Okay, I'm live. Awesome. Okay, lesson 9. I've decided for the rest of them, instead of having that description just inside YouTube, I'm actually going to pull it out and put it in Canvas so you can get those main points right there. I already put them into a few of the YouTube ones, but I'm not going to put them in the rest just because it's much easier for me to go from this. So let me pull this over here and pull this over here. And go ahead and open up Atom. Alright, let's make our lesson 9 folder. Go ahead and throw an index file inside there, just for examples, and use the the shortcut to make the default tags. Okay, so we're going to learn about margins, padding, alignment, and floating today. Getting ready to learn about the CSS box model. We're going to make, let's make a few elements in here. We'll just use divs since that's a standard division or divider. Just very generic sort of thing. Let's give these IDs. And let's get 4 of them. 2, 3, 4. And we're going to make some CSS. For these with the, actually let's do all the divs. We'll have a, let's do a height of 100 pixels and a width of 200 pixels. Let's give D1 a background color. Let's go red. Copy that and make a D2. Let's have this one be green, not green. Green. There we go. Blue and yellow. Hopefully I don't cough too much during this, but chances aren't very good. Alright, so pulling up that file, it will look like we have 4 rectangles. Let's go ahead and give these also borders, just so we can see that separation. Border. Let's do a solid black. Spell solid right. That is spelled right. It's weird. Black. Like 2 pixel. Yeah, that's enough. Alright, so we have 4 div elements. Just so when we're working with margins and padding, we can see how that affects these elements. Alright, we got this border. We can see that there's a more thick black line between when there's 2 on top of each other, which makes sense because there's 2 pixels from the red and 2 pixels from the green, making a 4 pixel wide black border where they touch, 2 from each one, right? If we open up developer tools, I can hover over the div 1 and it only highlights part of the black border. Because we can click on it and see that we have our element, which is 200 by 100, and it has a border of 2, which is the same all the way around because I just said 2 once. Remember, if you want the borders or the numbers to be different, this is part of the lesson. If you're using the shorthand, right, instead of saying border left, border right, border top, border bottom, we can just say border, and then we can list the things out. So the type, the color, and then if they're all the same, we just put one number. If the top and bottom and left right are the same, right, top and bottom's the same, and left and right are the same but different, we can put two numbers, and that will do the top, bottom, and the left, right. Or you can do 4, and it will go top, right, bottom, left. It goes clockwise, starting with the top. Anyways, we have that, so hurrah. Let me go ahead and shrink that because we're going to have this box model open for what we're doing here. Okay, so margins and padding. We're going to start with margins. Margins are for adding space around your element, the actual tags. There are 4 locations for margins. We have the top, the right, the bottom, and the left, right? That order is important to remember, which is why I'll always do it that way. So if we want to add a border, let's go ahead and do that and that so it's easier to see. I could do margin top to the D1, which is our red element, and if I refresh, I can see that the whole thing moved down a little bit because that one has a top. That's a little bit harder to see. Let me switch it to a bottom. Now you can see that there's a 10 pixel margin on the bottom of my red element. So if I select that and go down here, I can see that I have no border, or no margin, sorry, on the top, left, or right, but I do have a 10 margin on the bottom. I can do the shorthand one as well. So if I just say margin 10, just like what we did with the border, this will put a margin of 10 on every side. If I do 2, oops, the top and bottom will be 10. That's the first number. The right and left will be 20 because that's the second number. If I do 3, I think it goes top, bottom, and then left, right combined. I don't remember if 3 actually works. Let's try it. It goes top, left, right, bottom, which makes sense because top, right, bottom, left, there's nothing for the left, so it assumes the right. And then if I have 4, obviously top, right, bottom, left. Right, that's the order. It goes clockwise starting at the top of an element. So adding borders is how you can kind of move things around a little bit and put spacing between things. So if I go ahead and pull this back out, these things are really close together, and most of the time when you have elements or text and things like that, you don't really want them to be right on top of each other. So margins are a pretty good idea to add in there. So I'm going to go ahead and add a margin to all of these elements. That's 25 pixels wide. It's a little big, but it makes the point. Oh, margin, that I have 4 distinct elements, and it moves it away from the side of the wall and all that kind of stuff. All right, so margin. Right, the shorthand is just the word margin, or you can say margin hyphen any of the 4 directions and it will work. Let me check the chat. There's no questions. Okay, any questions in class for this? It's pretty straightforward stuff. Just remember the order is clockwise starting at the top. All right, so margin adds space to the outside of our element. So the total width of our element is the margin plus the width. So we have 25 on the left plus 200 for the width plus 25 on the right. Right? So the width of this thing is 250. And the height would be 150. 25 plus 100 plus 25. The border does not affect it, if I remember correctly. Does anyone remember from the border lessons if the border goes in on the element or is on top of the element. Doesn't look like people remember. Let's look it up real fast. I just want to make sure I'm saying the right thing. Yep. Borders, hooray. I want to know their... and the box property. Width plus padding plus border. This div is smaller. Width is 300 pixels. Yep, this div is bigger. The element often appears bigger than you have set because the element's border and padding. Padding, well, yeah, but okay. So the border is added on as well. So the actual width of this is 25 plus 2 plus 200 plus 2 plus 25. So 254. So that's important if you're trying to have elements be in a certain location on the screen, because we're about to get to layouts. This is why we're learning the box model. I want this to be in this location on the screen. You need to remember all the elements around it. Just because I said 200 doesn't mean this is actually 200 wide. 254 is quite a bit more on top of that. Let's talk about padding. Let's go ahead and add inside all of these some text so we can see it. All right? So the text by default goes to the top left. That's how we read, from the top left to right, and then go down a line left to right, yada, yada, yada. Okay, so margins are about the outside. Dun, 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 dun. What are we doing here? Oh, that is an important thing to include. Okay. All right, so having selected this first div element, I see that there's additional white space around the screen. You should be able to see that. It looks like it's updating now, right? There's a little bit extra to the left and there's a little bit extra to the right. Something else has a border that's not this div element. The body by default has an 8-pixel border, which is important to know if you want to put something exactly in a certain corner and want it right there. You have to know that you need to change the default border of the body to 0. Now the absolute location will be where you tell it to be. Or if you want it to be centered on your screen, you need to remember that there's that 8-pixel border if you're using the absolute values, so that it's not off by 8 pixels. Albeit that's relatively small, but it is kind of enough that it would make a point. Okay. Let's see what else. Body to 0. Yeah, let's go ahead and do a body 0. So if I want the whole body to have no margin, I just tell it, say, margin 0 pixels. And now things shift over, and they are where they're supposed to be. Why does my HTML look like it has something? It shouldn't. It doesn't. Okay. Okay, before we get to padding, let's do this little exercise real fast. We're going to change... Wait, hold on. No, we're not. Never mind. Oh, yeah, we're going to do that. Okay. Just have to look at my notes. I'm going to break these up so that they're easier to manipulate. Is this white space needed when you're doing your code? No, it just helps it to be easier to read. Yeah.
Oh, what are those blue tags called? Are those like classes? Like the blue...
These are indexes.
Indexes.
Right, or IDs, sorry. Because they start with a hash.
Oh, okay.
If it was a class, it would start with a period.
Oh, okay.
There we go. Okay, so we're going to try to line up this yellow div container to the end of the blue div container. Stop highlighting stuff. There we go. All right, so because this is cascading, if I have another margin here, this is going to override the margin of the div. All right, because it's below it, which means it takes precedence. I don't want to depend on the D3 though. I want the yellow one to go to the end. So I want the left side of this yellow element to line up with the right side of this blue element. So instead of using the margin shortcut, because I only want to add one margin to this, I'm going to specifically say that it's going to be margin what? Left or right? It'll be margin left because I'm adding the margin to the left of the element. Okay, so I want it to be a certain number of pixels. I know that the margin is 25 by default. So I'm going to have to add 50 to get that. But I also know that the width is 200. So if I do 250, save and refresh, that skips the whole margin. Wait, I don't want it to skip the whole margin. I want it to line up. So let's do 225. Let's change this one so that it doesn't have a bottom margin. I don't know if this is going to work. I'm hoping that it will keep the margins for everything else, but override just the bottom margin. It is. Okay. Margin top. Okay. I need to... Yeah. Do that as well. Okay. There we go. Okay, so I took off the margin for the blue element. I took off the top margin of the yellow element, and I tried to move the yellow element over the 25 for the margin here, plus the 200 for the box. Like I said earlier, you can see these do not line up because the border does affect it. So I need this to be 229.
Wait, would it be 227?
Yeah. Wait.
Yeah, 227.
If I want it to be on the same line, I need it to be 227.
Yeah, I think so.
If I want it to be
The
kitty
borders-
corner, it has to be 229.
Oh, okay.
That makes sense?
Yeah, yeah.
2 pixels for the border right here, 2 pixels for the border right there. If I want it to line up, which I did, it was 227. 229 would move it over more than I want.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so does that make sense when you're positioning elements with margins? This is getting into the box model, but we're not really officially talking about that until lesson 10. We're just talking about margins, and we're pulling up borders because we've worked with borders before. But you can see how these little things will make a pretty big difference on your website when you're trying to get something to be a certain location. With all this other stuff. Okay, so We covered margins. We've covered padding. They both apply to the outside and they increase the size of the object. So now let's talk about padding. Padding applies to the inside of an object. It's like a margin property. So you can have the top right, bottom left, and the connected one. So if I go here and add a padding of, let's say, 5 pixels, it's going to add a, oh, it's going to default the color. How did they change it? You can't really see it because it takes the default value of the background color of the element. So we're going to add these divs inside P elements. So that we can actually see that padding. Or not, because it's deciding to be a pain. Do I have to add CSS for this? Yeah, I'm going to have to add CSS for this because it's going to inherit its parent thing. There we go. Yeah, let's go ahead and put all these in there, just so it's easier to make it visible. Okay, let me go ahead and take off the padding so you can see what it looks like with no padding or the default padding. That's how it looked without the default padding. Wait, I'm adding padding to the paragraph or to the... Yeah, let me pull this. I'm going to take these off and this off just to make things easier to see so I can help show padding. Okay. We can see the paragraph elements. All right, I'm going to increase the padding of this yellow one by 10 pixels. That should be enough that we can see the difference here. All right. Div 1 through, those all say div 1. I didn't realize I forgot to change those. All right, 1 through 3 are the same size. Div 4, even though it has the same width, is bigger because I added this padding, which means on the inside, I will have a 10 pixel border around any element contained within that element. Margins for the outside, paddings for the inside. So it increased the size of my entire object, or the width, by 20, 10 for each side. Right? So if I click on this, I now have a 25 plus 2 plus 10 plus 200 plus 10 plus 2 plus 25 as the total width of my object. Right? Because you can see how things add up, and this will tie in with fixed position things. You rarely want to say, I want this to be exactly here, because that is difficult to do and extremely difficult to maintain. You change the border of one thing, you have to change the borders of all the things so they're still in the same relationship to each other. So anyways, the full width of this thing now is what? 250, 60, 70, 274 is the total width of this yellow thing. I'm highlighting the padding by selecting this part right here. So we can see there's that padding around it. The benefit of padding is now you can have alignments with it. Let me. Yeah, they work in conjunction with it. All right, so if I say so we know about, I think we already knew about the align, text align. Right? Which will just align the text in it. Doesn't align the actual element, just the text. What if I want that paragraph to be aligned in the center of that whole element? Then I have to use a vertical align. I'm going to pull that out of there because I'm pretty sure this is going to have to go inside the paragraph because that's the thing that's going to be vertically aligned. Nope, I messed up. Something's wrong. Center is not right. That's what's wrong. It's middle. Her vertical align, not center. What? vertical. ALIGN. I spelt that right. Maybe it goes into the parent element. So when I'm speaking about parent and child elements, does that kind of make sense? Child elements go inside parent elements. So when you're talking about CSS, the parent element is the most outermost thing. So inside our web pages, the most parent element is HTML, which has two child elements, head and body, which have child elements, right? So with CSS, the parent thing will be used by default, but if a child has a property that's set to the same thing, like this background color, right? P overrides the background color here because P is a child of the D1 element. So it takes the child's property over the parent's property because it's cascading, right, as it goes down. So let's go ahead and put this vertical align middle in here, see if that fixes it. Nope, still no good. Just a quick note here, do not use the center tag because it is very outdated and old, and any day could just not work anymore. The center tag does not do what you think you want it to do. I need to have multiple elements to do vertical alignment. Oh, and I need things to float too. Okay, never mind about the vertical alignment stuff. That doesn't work until I actually change how things are created. Okay, so let's just talk about centering things real fast. I'm going to close this. I'm going to center this yellow one. The easiest way to center something is to set the margin to auto. It is now centered on the page. If I increase the size of the page, it's still centered on the page. Okay, margin auto. That's how you center elements on a web page. Do not use the center tag. The easiest way to deal with that, auto would center the whole thing if you have some stuff going on. So sometimes it's not a good idea to just say auto straight up. It's better to do 0 auto if you don't want to have a top bottom border, right? I mean margin. Save my file. It looks the same. Or I could say margin left is auto and margin right is auto. And that will do the same thing as margin 0 auto.
Wait, so what does 0 auto do again?
Top and bottom margins are 0. Left and right are auto.
Oh.
Right? So that's the same thing as saying margin left auto, margin right auto, right? And then not setting anything for the top and bottom because it will default to that. So that's how you center. That's pretty easy to do. I do suggest doing the 0 auto or whatever margin you want to have in something there if you have a top or bottom one. Let's talk about the floating property. So far when we've created elements, they have been linear. Div 1 is on top, so div 1 is on top. Div 2 is second, so it's second, right? But what if I don't want things to stack vertically? What if I want to stack them horizontally? I can do that with this float property. Let's see, that's out. With the first div, I'm going to float it left. Div 2, I'm going to float it to the left. It looks like I'm going to float all of these to the left, actually. Okay. Some things to talk about here. Green. Why is that doing that where it doesn't do it there? All right, so by floating these things, instead of having an absolute position, which is the default value, is to be absolute, they're now floating. Which is why my yellow element suddenly went to the top and behind them. Right? Because it becomes after they do, so it goes behind them by default. Does that make sense? So with floating, they're going to keep the same distance from each other because that's the padding that I used. But by floating them, I can make things go vertical now. So I'm telling them to float to the left of the previous element. Right, so it goes to the left right here. If I tell it to go to the right, it would go over here. So if I did so now they're totally out of order because div 1 is float left, div 2 floats right, and div 3 floats left. Does this make sense? Anyone have questions on this? Okay. So we're starting to get into layouts because we can see how we can reposition things. They don't just have to be vertical. Dun 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 dun. What else do I need to talk about when doing this? So yeah, again, just tying in, remember the margins, the padding, the alignment, the floating, they all affect this. So here I'm seeing, I don't know what this is, why it's white. Oh, because div 4 is right here. Yeah, I don't know why the div 4 is down here, but it's automatically making the padding for it. Yeah, let's pull up the developer tools and take a look at what's going on. Oh man, it fixed it. Because it's being blocked, let's go to where it's blocked. That paragraph element gets big. Right? Because it needs to be visible, but it still needs to have this 16 pixel margin. Wait, why is it that far down? Oh, and these still need to have their 25 pixel margin, so that's why it's showing up all the way down here. Because I didn't tell it to use anything special. All right, let's go back over. Okay. Float is fun. You can do right and left. I already covered that. I already covered what happens if one's right and the other one's left. Getting used to using the float property takes a lot of practice, as you could very easily tell, especially with the screen size, because that changes everything up too. This looks very different than this, which looks different from this. There's this clear property. Okay, so what if I do, just trying to use the examples here. Go ahead and comment out that one, so that one goes away. Yeah, because that's acting the same way as my other div did, because it's going to naturally float to its location. To help with that, we could always do a clear. I'm going to do it inline just so I don't have to deal with the other stuff, because I don't want the internal divs to grab this. Style equals quotes, clear. Clear has 5 possible values: left, right, both, and none, and inherit. The most common values are left, right, or both. Let's do both. Clear both. This will make it so nothing's floating to the left or to the right of that paragraph. So now when I go full screen, it stays where it's supposed to, like it's not floating. Does that make sense? So if I have floating things and then I have things that I don't want to float anymore, I got to clear the floating from the previous one so it does show up where it's supposed to be. Oh, apparently vertical line is something we already did. Oh, that was with the text and the images, right? We did vertical line with those. That was from a previous lesson. That's why it was just a refresher. And why I was confused trying to use the example, because they didn't really give me code. Okay, so that's it for the lesson. Let's go through the actual assignment now. We have a template file. Let's download. Actually, you kind of already made the template file, it looks like. I'm going to download it anyways. Pull this over here. Pull this back out. Open this up. Drag and drop this right here. All right, so here is a boxes file. Let me go ahead and close my index. Boxes.html. I'm going to go ahead and open that up so I can have it here. We have a couple of divs. 8 divs. 4 rectangles, 4 squares. The assignment is to make divs 1 through 4 a staircase where the corners touch, just like figure 9.4 in the textbook. So this corner will touch this corner. These lines will not be at the same line. Does that make sense? I want them to be kitty corner to each other. And then there's another one over here, and then over here. So this will be a staircase going that direction. With div 3 and div 4, but having our div 4 being the leftmost element. Have div 4 keep its left margin of 15 pixels. Add a 15 pixel margin to the sides of, to all sides of div 5 through div 8 and float them all to the left. So when you're done with this, oh gosh, do I have a answer key that I can show you real fast. Let me see. Nope, that's not it. Nope, that's not it. Oh, did I not save it? I didn't save it. Okay. Let me just draw it out real fast, just so that we're all clear on the same place. All right, so gonna have those rectangles that are gonna be created so that the corners kiss but are not the same line. This is not close enough. These corners should be touching just at the corner, right? So 1 through 4 should be like a staircase going like that. 5 through 8, that's a text box, should be squares that are all floated to the left, which means that they're all going to have a margin and be evenly distributed squares that are all floating next to each other. So you should have a staircase of rectangles and a line of squares. Make sense? Okay, time's yours to work on stuff until class is over. Close that. I'm going to make an answer key for this real fast too, so I can actually include that. Let me minimize that. Where's my stop